The wind howled through Port Haven, Maine, a small coastal town where the Atlantic's gray waves crashed against jagged rocks, and the late autumn storm painted the sky in shades of bruised purple. Rain pelted the weathered wooden exterior of the Lighthouse Cafe, a modest establishment perched on the edge of the harbor, its neon sign flickering faintly against the gloom. Inside, Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old waitress with auburn hair tied back in a loose ponytail, wiped down the counter for what felt like the 1,000th time that morning. Her hands, calloused from years of scrubbing dishes and carrying trays, trembled slightly, not just from the chill seeping through the cafe's old windows, but from the weight of worry that had settled deep in her chest. Sarah's life was a delicate balancing act, one that teetered on the edge of collapse. Her mother, Ellen, lay in a hospital bed, 30 miles away, her heart condition worsening with every passing week. And the medical bills stacked on Sarah's kitchen table were a constant reminder of how little she could do to help. Rent was overdue again, the landlord's polite but firm notices piling up next to the bills, and the tips Sarah scraped together from long shifts barely covered the groceries she needed to keep her small apartment stocked. Yet, despite it all, Sarah wore a smile as warm as the coffee she poured because, in her mind, kindness was the one thing she could still afford to give. It was the currency of her soul, the only way she knew to push back against a world that seemed determined to take everything from her. The cafe was quiet that morning, the storm keeping most of the regulars away. The usual hum of fishermen swapping stories and tourists snapping photos of the harbor was replaced by the steady drum of rain and the occasional creak of the cafe's wooden beams. Sarah moved with practiced ease, refilling the sugar dispensers and straightening the menus, her green eyes scanning the room for any task to keep her busy. She was the kind of person who noticed the overlooked, the elderly widower who lingered too long over his coffee, the single mother whose tired smile hid a world of struggle, the dock worker who tipped generously despite his own thin wallet. To Sarah, these weren't just customers. They were pieces of Port Haven's heartbeat, and she believed that even the smallest gesture, a kind word, an extra slice of pie, a moment of patience, could make their world a little softer. It was a belief born from her own hardships, from nights spent crying over bills she couldn't pay, and days spent pretending everything was fine for her mother's sake. Kindness, she thought, was the only way to keep the darkness at bay, even if it went unnoticed by most. As the morning wore on, the bell above the cafe's door jingled, and a woman stepped inside, shaking rain from her tattered coat. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with gray hair matted against her forehead, and a face etched with exhaustion. Her clothes were worn, the kind of faded denim and threadbare sweater that spoke of hard times, and her hands clutched a small, soaked bag as if it held her entire world. To the few customers nursing their coffee at the counter, she was just another drifter, one of the many who passed through Port Haven on their way to nowhere. But Sarah saw something else. She saw the way the woman's shoulders hunched against the cold, the way her eyes darted nervously around the room as if she didn't belong. Sarah's heart tightened with recognition. She knew that look, the one that said, "You were one bad day away from breaking." Without a word, she grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter and approached the woman who had settled into a corner booth by the window, her gaze fixed on the stormy harbor outside. "Here, you look like you could use this," Sarah said, her voice gentle as she handed over the towel. The woman looked up, startled, her eyes wide with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. "Oh, thank you," she murmured, her voice rough as if unused to kindness. Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "No trouble at all. Can I get you something warm?" The clam chowder's fresh today, and it'll take the chill right out of you." The woman hesitated, her hand brushing against the pocket of her coat, where Sarah guessed there wasn't much to find. The menu sat untouched on the table, its prices glaring like a challenge. Sarah didn't wait for an answer. "Tell you what," she said, leaning in conspiratorially. "I've got a bowl with your name on it. On me." Before the woman could protest, Sarah was already heading to the kitchen, her steps light despite the heaviness in her heart. In the kitchen, Sarah ladled a steaming bowl of clam chowder, its creamy aroma mingling with the scent of fresh-baked cornbread. She added a slice of the bread to a plate, knowing full well that giving away food was against the cafe's strict rules. Donna Price, the manager, was a stickler for policy, her clipboard always at the ready to jot down infractions. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to care about rules when someone was hungry. She'd seen too many people in Port Haven go without, fishermen laid off after a bad season, families stretched thin by the rising cost of living, transients passing through with nothing but the clothes on their backs. If she could ease even a fraction of that suffering, she would, even if it meant risking a lecture from Donna. She carried the bowl and plate back to the woman's booth, setting them down with a wink. "Don't worry about it," she said softly. "Just enjoy." The woman's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she reached for the spoon. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah just nodded, her smile unwavering. "You don't have to say anything. Just eat up before it gets cold." As she walked back to the counter, Sarah felt a small spark of warmth in her chest, the kind that came from doing something right, even if no one else noticed. What she didn't know was that the woman whose name was Clara wasn't just a drifter. She was Eleanor Grayson, the reclusive owner of the Lighthouse Cafe, who had come to Port Haven under the guise of a weary traveler to see how her business was really run. Eleanor's sharp eyes followed Sarah as she moved through the cafe, her mind cataloging every detail, the way Sarah refilled an elderly man's coffee with a gentle pat on his hand, the way she slipped an extra napkin to a young boy who'd spilled his juice, the way she kept the cafe humming with a quiet, selfless grace. But trouble was brewing. Donna Price stormed into the cafe just as Sarah was wiping down a table, her heels clicking sharply against the worn wooden floor. Donna was a tall woman with a pinched expression, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to tug at her patience. She carried her clipboard like a weapon, her eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. "Sarah," she barked, her voice cutting through the soft clatter of dishes. Sarah straightened, her heart sinking. She knew that tone. "What's this I hear about you giving away food again?" Donna's eyes narrowed, her pen poised over her clipboard like a judge's gavel. Sarah's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. It was just a bowl of chowder, Donna. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. "I was going to cover it myself." Donna's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "You don't get to make those calls, Sarah. This isn't a charity. You pull this again, and you're out. Understand?" The words stung, but Sarah knotted her jaw tight. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with her mother's hospital bills, not with the rent looming, not with the weight of her world resting on her shoulders. As Donna turned away, Sarah glanced back at Clara, who was quietly eating her chowder, her eyes fixed on the exchange. For a moment, their gazes met, and Sarah thought she saw something flicker in the older woman's expression, something like respect, or maybe recognition. But there was no time to dwell on it. The lunch rush was starting, and the cafe began to fill with damp, windswept customers seeking shelter from the storm. Sarah threw herself into her work, pouring coffee, taking orders, and flashing her signature smile, even as her mind churned with worry. She thought of her mother, whose latest test results were due tomorrow. She thought of the landlord's latest letter tucked unopened in her bag. She thought of the way Donna's words had cut sharp and cold, and wondered if kindness was a luxury she could no longer afford. Yet as she moved through the cafe, she couldn't help but stop to help a young mother wrangle her toddler, or to share a laugh with old Mr. Jenkins, who came every day to read the paper and talk about the sea. It was just who she was. By mid-afternoon, the storm had eased, but the air in the cafe remained heavy. Sarah's shift was nearing its end, and she felt the ache in her legs, the weight of the day pressing down on her. She stole a moment to lean against the counter, her eyes drifting to the harbor outside, where fishing boats bobbed in the restless waves. She wondered what it would be like to sail away, to leave behind the bills and the stress and the constant fear of falling short. But then she thought of her mother, of the way Ellen's face lit up when Sarah visited, of the way she'd taught her to always look for the good in people, even when it was hard to find. Sarah straightened, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She wasn't a quitter. She'd find a way to make it work just like she always had. As she turned back to the cafe, she noticed Clara slipping out the door, her empty bowl and plate left neatly on the table. A small folded piece of paper sat beside them, tucked under the cornbread plate. Curious, Sarah picked it up, unfolding it, to reveal a single word written in shaky handwriting: "Thank you." Her heart swelled, and for a moment, the weight of her worries lifted. She slipped the note into her apron pocket, a tiny reminder that even in a storm, kindness could still find a way to shine. What Sarah didn't know was that her small act of compassion had set something in motion, something that would change her life and the lives of those around her in ways she could never have imagined. The rain had softened to a drizzle in Port Haven, Maine, but the air inside the Lighthouse Cafe remained thick with tension. Sarah Mitchell moved through her afternoon shift with the same quiet grace as always, her auburn ponytail swaying as she balanced trays of steaming clam chowder and baskets of cornbread. The storm had driven more customers through the cafe's creaky door, their boots leaving muddy trails on the wooden floor, and Sarah welcomed the distraction. Each smile she offered, each "How's the coffee treating you?" was a shield against the gnawing worry in her gut. Her mother's latest hospital bill had arrived that morning, tucked into her mailbox like a silent accusation, and the numbers stared back at her in black ink: $3,427.62, due in 10 days. Her tips, carefully counted and stashed in a tin under her bed, wouldn't come close to covering it. Rent was already 2 weeks late, and the landlord's patience was wearing thin. Yet Sarah poured coffee and cleared plates with a warmth that never wavered, because letting her struggles show felt like admitting defeat. She glanced at the corner booth, where the mysterious woman Clara had sat earlier, the folded thank-you note still tucked in her apron pocket, like a talisman. She didn't know why it meant so much, but it did a small reminder that her kindness hadn't gone entirely unnoticed. Unbeknownst to Sarah, the woman she'd fed wasn't just a weary traveler. Clara was Eleanor Grayson, the reclusive owner of the Lighthouse Cafe, who had slipped into Port Haven under a tattered coat and a false name to see her business through fresh eyes. Eleanor was no stranger to hardship. She'd built the cafe from nothing 30 years ago, pouring her savings into a rundown shack by the harbor and turning it into a local institution. But success had come at a cost. Long hours, a failed marriage, and a growing distance from the community she'd once known so well. Rumors swirled in Port Haven about her absence. Some said she'd moved to Boston, others that she was ill. In truth, Eleanor had been quietly watching her empire from afar, relying on reports from her manager, Donna Price, to keep tabs on the cafe. But whispers of staff discontent and slipping customer satisfaction had prompted her to return disguised as a nobody to uncover the truth. Sarah's act of giving her a bowl of chowder without hesitation had struck a chord deep within Eleanor, stirring memories of why she'd opened the cafe in the first place, to create a place where people felt cared for, not just served. As she sat in a nearby motel that afternoon, peeling off her damp disguise, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, the way her green eyes softened with empathy, the way she moved through the cafe like she was tending to a family, not just a job. Back at the cafe, Sarah's shift rolled on, but the air felt heavier now. Donna Price hovered like a hawk, her clipboard clutched tightly as she scribbled notes about every misplaced napkin or slightly overfilled coffee cup. Donna was in her early 40s with sharp features and a perpetual frown that seemed etched into her face. She'd been managing the cafe for 3 years, and in that time, she'd turned it into a machine of efficiency. Schedules were rigid, waste was non-existent, and rules were ironclad. To Donna, Sarah's small acts of generosity were a personal affront, a crack in the system she prided herself on maintaining. If everyone gave away of food, we'd be bankrupt by next week, she'd snapped during a staff meeting, once her eyes lingering on Sarah. The other staff members, Lily, a shy 19-year-old who'd just started college, and Mike, a gruff line cook who kept to himself, knew better than to cross Donna. But Sarah couldn't help herself. She saw the cafe as more than a business. It was a haven, a place where Port Haven's heartbeat pulsed through every conversation, every shared meal. As the lunch rush slowed, a new group entered the cafe, a young couple with a toddler in a stroller, their faces drawn with exhaustion. The man wore a faded work jacket, his hands rough from what Sarah guessed was manual labor, and the woman's eyes darted nervously as she scanned the menu. Their little girl, bundled in a too-small coat, clutched a stuffed whale and babbled softly. Sarah approached their table with her usual warmth, kneeling to smile at the toddler. "Hey there, cutie. That's a pretty cool whale you've got." The girl giggled, and the mother's tense expression softened slightly. "What can I get started for you folks?" Sarah asked, her pen poised over her notepad. The man hesitated, his voice low. "Just 2 waters for now, I think." Sarah caught the way his hand stayed in his pocket, as if afraid to check for cash that wasn't there. She'd seen that look too many times in Port Haven, where the fishing industry's ups and downs left families scraping by. Without missing a beat, she said, "You know, we've got a special today, chowder and cornbread for half price. I can throw in a milk for the little one, too." Sound good? It was a lie. There was no special. But Sarah knew she could cover the cost with her tips, even if it meant skipping her own groceries this week. The couple exchanged a glance, relief flickering in their eyes. "That'd be great," the woman said softly. "Thank you." Sarah nodded, her heart twisting as she headed to the kitchen to place the order. She didn't notice Donna watching from the counter, her lips pressed into a thin line, nor did she see Eleanor, now dressed in a plain sweater and scarf, slip back into the cafe and take a seat near the window, her eyes sharp and observant. Eleanor had returned to see if Sarah's kindness was a fluke or a pattern, and what she saw confirmed her suspicions. Sarah wasn't just generous, she was deliberate, choosing moments to help that others might overlook. When an elderly regular Mr. Jenkins fumbled with his wallet, Sarah discreetly waved off his attempt to pay for an extra coffee, whispering, "This one's on the house, Mr. J." When Lily, the young waitress, spilled a tray of glasses, Sarah was there in an instant, helping her clean up before Donna could swoop in with a reprimand. Eleanor scribbled notes in a small notebook, her handwriting tight and precise. This was more than a good employee. This was someone who embodied the soul of what the Lighthouse Cafe was meant to be. But trouble was brewing. Donna, her patience fraying, called Sarah over to the counter during a lull. "You're skating on thin ice." She hissed, her voice low enough that customers wouldn't hear. "I saw you comp that coffee for Jenkins. And don't think I didn't notice you sneaking food to that family. You're not running a soup kitchen, Sarah." Sarah's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. "I covered it, Donna. It's just a few dollars." They needed it. Donna's eyes flashed. "It's not about the money. It's about the rules. You think you're better than everyone else, don't you? Always playing the saint." The words cut deeper than Sarah expected, stirring a flicker of doubt. Was she being reckless? Was her kindness just a selfish need to feel good at the expense of her job? She swallowed hard, forcing a nod. "I'll follow the rules," she said, though the words felt like a betrayal of herself. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah's resolve was tested again. Tom Harper, a regular customer and local fisherman, slid into a booth with his usual thermos of tea and a weathered copy of the local paper. Tom was in his 30s, with a quiet demeanor and calloused hands that spoke of long days on the water. He'd always been kind to Sarah, leaving generous tips and asking about her mother's health with genuine concern. Today, though, he seemed distracted, his eyes lingering on Sarah as she worked. "Rough day?" he asked when she refilled his tea. She laughed softly, brushing off the question. "Just the usual chaos. You know how it is." Tom nodded, but his gaze held hers a moment longer. "You do a lot for folks around here, Sarah. Don't think it goes unnoticed." His words caught her off guard, and for a moment she felt seen in a way she hadn't in a long time. But before she could respond, Donna's voice cut through the air, calling her to the back for a quick meeting. In the cramped office, Donna didn't bother sitting down. "I'm warning you one last time," she said, her voice cold. "You pull one more stunt like today, and you're done. I don't care how much the customers like you." Sarah's stomach churned, but she nodded, her hands clenched at her sides. She thought of her mother, of the hospital bills, of the rent notice waiting at home. Losing this job wasn't an option. But as she left the office, she caught sight of the young family leaving the cafe. The toddler waving her stuffed whale with a grin. The mother mouthed a quiet, "Thank you," and Sarah's heart lifted just enough to keep going. She didn't know that Eleanor, still watching from her corner, had written a single sentence in her notebook: "Sarah Mitchell is the heart of this place." Nor did she know that Donna, seething with resentment, was already planning her next move, a move that would threaten to unravel everything Sarah had fought to hold together. The Lighthouse Cafe buzzed with the late afternoon hum of clinking dishes and murmured conversations, but for Sarah Mitchell, the air felt charged with an unspoken threat. The storm that had battered Port Haven, Maine, had finally passed, leaving a pale sun to gleam off the harbor's restless waves. Yet inside the cafe, a different kind of storm was brewing. Sarah moved through her tasks with her usual care, refilling coffee for a group of fishermen, slipping a straw to a shy teenager, flashing a smile at old Mr. Jenkins as he recounted a story about a storm from '92. Her auburn ponytail bobbed as she worked, but her green eyes carried a flicker of unease. Donna Price's warning from earlier echoed in her mind, one more misstep, and she'd be out the door. The weight of her mother's hospital bills, the overdue rent, and the constant juggle of survival pressed down on her, but Sarah kept moving, because stopping meant facing the fear that she might not be enough to hold it all together. She didn't know that Eleanor Grayson, the cafe's reclusive owner, disguised as the weary Clara, was still watching from a corner booth, her sharp eyes cataloging every moment of Sarah's quiet compassion. Nor did she know that Donna, clipboard in hand, was waiting for an excuse to make good on her threat. The cafe was fuller now, the after-storm crowd bringing in a mix of locals and a few tourists braving the chilly Maine evening. Sarah's co-worker Lily, a nervous 19-year-old with wide eyes and a habit of twisting her apron when stressed, darted between tables trying to keep up. Sarah caught her eye and gave a reassuring nod, knowing Lily was still learning the ropes and terrified of Donna's wrath. When Lily nearly dropped a tray of water glasses, Sarah was there in an instant, steadying the tray with a gentle hand. "You've got this," she whispered, and Lily's tense shoulders relaxed slightly. It was a small moment, but it didn't go unnoticed. Tom Harper, the fisherman who'd become a regular fixture in the cafe, watched from his booth, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Tom had always admired Sarah's way of making people feel seen, but today he sensed something off. Her smile was a little too tight, her movements a little too careful. He wanted to say something to ask if she was okay, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he sipped his tea and kept his eyes on her, a quiet resolve forming in his chest. Trouble came just before the dinner rush. An elderly regular, Mrs. Clara Thompson, not to be confused with Eleanor's alias, shuffled into the cafe, her cane tapping against the wooden floor. Thompson was a widow who came every Thursday for a slice of blueberry pie and a cup of decaf. Her stories of Port Haven's past as much a part of the cafe as its checkered tablecloths. Today, though, she looked frailer than usual, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her purse. Sarah noticed immediately, her heart tugging at the sight. "Evening, Mrs. Thompson," she said, sliding a menu onto the table. "Pies fresh today, extra blueberries, just how you like it." Mrs. Thompson smiled weakly, but her eyes were clouded with worry. "Oh, Sarah, I'm not sure I can afford it this week. Things are tight." Her voice was barely a whisper, and Sarah's chest tightened. She knew what tight meant in Port Haven, pensions stretched thin, heating bills eating up what little was left. Without hesitating, Sarah leaned in her voice low. "Don't you worry about that. The pie's on me tonight. And maybe a scoop of vanilla ice cream to go with it, Mrs." Thompson's eyes widened, a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "Oh, Sarah, you don't have to." But Sarah was already heading to the kitchen, her decision made. She plated the pie with a generous scoop of ice cream, her hands moving quickly to avoid drawing attention. She'd cover the cost herself, just like she had for the family earlier, even if it meant dipping into the last of her grocery money. But as she set the dessert in front of Mrs. Thompson, she felt Donna's eyes boring into her from across the room. The manager's heels clicked sharply as she approached her clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Sarah," she said, her voice low but venomous a word. "Now." Sarah's stomach dropped, but she followed Donna to the back office, her heart pounding. The door barely closed before Donna unleashed her fury. "You think you can just give away food whenever you feel like it?" She snapped her face inches from Sarah's. "First, the chowder, then that family, and now pie for Thompson. This is a business, not your personal charity." Sarah's cheeks burned, but she stood her ground, her voice trembling but firm. "I was going to pay for it, Donna. She's struggling. It's one slice of pie." Donna's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "You don't get it, do you? You're not in charge here." "I am." The confrontation spilled out of the office and into the cafe, where customers and staff could hear every word. Donna's voice rose sharp and cutting. "You're done, Sarah. Pack your things and get out." The words hit like a punch, and the cafe fell silent. Lily froze mid-step, her tray wobbling. Mr. Jenkins looked up from his paper, his face creased with shock. Tom's hands tightened around his mug, his jaw clenching. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, her apron clutched in her hands, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Donna, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I need this job. My mom, she's sick. I'll follow the rules, I swear." But Donna was unmoved, her expression cold. Should have thought of that before you started stealing from the company. Out. The word echoed in the quiet, and Sarah felt her world tilt. She untied her apron with shaking hands, her cheeks burning with humiliation, as customers looked away, some awkward, some ashamed. Without a word, she grabbed her bag and walked out into the chilly evening, the bell above the door jingling like a final judgment. That night, Sarah sat on the sagging couch in her small apartment, the stack of unopened bills on the kitchen table looming like a mountain. The rain had started again, a soft patter against the windows, but it couldn't drown out the ache in her chest. She'd called her mother Ellen at the hospital, forcing a cheerful tone as she lied about having a day off. But alone in the dark, the truth crashed over her. How could she pay for Ellen's treatments now? How could she keep the apartment? Keep food on the table? Keep going? For the first time in years, Sarah let herself cry, the tears hot and heavy, as they fell. She thought of her mother's words spoken during a visit last week. Kindness is never wasted, Sarah. It comes back even if you don't see it. But tonight, those words felt hollow. Kindness had cost her everything, her job, her dignity, her fragile hope. She wondered if she'd been foolish to believe in it, to think that doing the right thing could outweigh the world's harsh rules. A knock at the door startled her. Wiping her eyes, she opened it to find Tom Harper standing there, his jacket damp from the rain. His usually calm demeanor was edged with urgency. "Sarah, you okay?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. She tried to smile, but it faltered. "Been better," she admitted, stepping aside to let him in. Tom hesitated, then spoke quickly as if the words had been burning inside him. "I was at the cafe when Donna fired you. It wasn't right. I overheard her talking to Mike in the kitchen afterward. She's been gunning for you for weeks, saying you make her look bad with the customers. She's trying to impress some big shot to get a promotion." Sarah's eyes widened, the pieces clicking into place. Donna's hostility wasn't just about rules. It was personal. Tom's voice softened. "You don't deserve this, Sarah. You're the best thing about that place. Don't give up." His words were a lifeline, but Sarah wasn't sure she could hold on. "Thanks, Tom," she said quietly, "but I don't know what to do now." Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor Grayson sat in her motel room, her notebook open on the table. She'd witnessed the entire scene, Sarah's kindness to Mrs. Thompson, Donna's cruel outburst, the stunned silence of the cafe. Her heart ached for Sarah. But as a businesswoman, she knew she had to tread carefully. Firing a manager without cause could spark legal trouble, and favoring Sarah might look like bias. She picked up her phone and called her business partner Henry, a pragmatic lawyer who'd helped her build her small chain of cafes. "I want to fire Donna," she said bluntly. "She's toxic." "But Sarah, she's the kind of person I built this place for." Henry's voice crackled through the line, cautious. "You've got to be strategic, Eleanor. Document everything. Make sure it's airtight." Eleanor nodded, her resolve hardening. She'd seen enough to know Sarah was worth fighting for, but she needed to act carefully to protect the cafe and Sarah. Back at her apartment, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The thank you note from Clara was still in her apron, now draped over a chair. She thought of the woman's tired eyes, of Mrs. Thompson's grateful smile, of the toddler with the stuffed whale. Those moments were why she kept going, why she believed in kindness, even when it hurt. But tonight, the hurt felt too big, the cost too steep. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small spark of defiance flickered. She wasn't done yet. She'd find a way to fight, not just for herself, but for her mother, for the people she'd helped, for the belief that doing good still mattered. What she didn't know was that her quiet acts of compassion had already set a chain of events in motion, one that would soon turn her darkest moment into a dawn she couldn't yet imagine. The morning sun broke over Port Haven, Maine, casting a golden glow across the harbor, where fishing boats swayed gently in the calm after the storm. The Lighthouse Cafe stood quiet, its neon sign flickering to life as the first customers trickled in, their boots echoing on the wooden floor. Sarah Mitchell, however, was not among them. She sat in her small apartment, staring at the stack of hospital bills on her kitchen table, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, her green eyes heavy with the weight of the previous day's humiliation, the memory of Donna Price's sharp words. "You're done, Sarah. Pack your things and get out," still stung a wound that throbbed with every glance at the unopened envelopes. She'd spent the night wrestling with doubt, wondering if her belief in kindness had been a naive mistake, a luxury she could no longer afford. Yet tucked in her apron pocket, the crumpled thank-you note from the mysterious Clara offered a faint flicker of hope, a reminder of why she'd kept going despite the odds. Unbeknownst to Sarah, the cafe was about to become the stage for a reckoning, one that would not only restore her, but also ripple through Port Haven, proving that kindness, though often unseen, could change everything. At the cafe, the air was tense as the staff prepared for the day. Lily, the young waitress, moved nervously, her hands twisting her apron as she glanced at the door, half expecting Donna's heels to click through at any moment. Mike, the line cook, kept his head down, flipping pancakes with a scowl still shaken by the previous day's drama. The customers, too, seemed subdued, their conversations quieter than usual, as if the cafe had lost a piece of its soul when Sarah walked out. But then the bell above the door jingled, and a woman stepped inside, not the tattered Clara from yesterday, but a sharply dressed figure in a navy blazer and scarf, her gray hair neatly pulled back, her posture commanding. Whispers rippled through the cafe as regulars exchanged glances. It was Eleanor Grayson, the reclusive owner of the Lighthouse Cafe, a woman most had only heard of in passing. She carried a leather notebook, her eyes scanning the room with a quiet authority that made even Donna, who'd just arrived with her clipboard, pause mid-step. Eleanor didn't waste time. She called for the staff to gather near the counter, her voice clear and steady. "Good morning." She began, her gaze sweeping over the nervous faces of Lily and Mike, then landing on Donna, whose smug expression faltered. "I've been away too long relying on reports instead of seeing this place for myself. That changed yesterday." She opened her notebook, her fingers tracing the pages where she'd written about Sarah's kindness, the bowl of chowder given without hesitation, the pie for Mrs. Thompson, the way she'd steadied Lily's tray and warmed every customer's heart. "I came here as Clara, a nobody, to see the truth of this place, and what I saw was a young woman who treated a stranger like family, who gave when she had nothing to give, who made this cafe more than a business." Her voice grew firm, her eyes locking onto Donna. "And I saw a manager who punished that kindness, who humiliated someone for doing what's right." The cafe was silent, the weight of Eleanor's words settling over the room like a tide. Donna's face paled, her clipboard clutched tightly as she tried to interject. "Mrs. Grayson, I was enforcing the rules. Sarah was giving away food, costing us money." Eleanor raised a hand, cutting her off. "Rules are important, Donna, but they don't trump humanity. This cafe was built to be a haven, a place where people feel cared for. Sarah understood that. You didn't." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Your actions yesterday were unacceptable. Firing Sarah in front of customers, berating her for an act of compassion, that's not leadership. That's cruelty. You're relieved of your duties effective immediately." Donna's mouth opened, then closed, her clipboard slipping from her hands and clattering to the counter. The customers, some of whom had witnessed Sarah's firing, murmured in surprise, a few nodding in approval. Donna grabbed her coat and stormed out the bell, jingling harshly behind her. Eleanor turned to the staff, her expression softening. This cafe belongs to Port Haven, to all of you who make it what it is, and it needs Sarah Mitchell back. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number, her voice steady but warm. Sarah, this is Eleanor Grayson. I owe you an apology. Can you come to the cafe? Across town. Sarah sat frozen on her couch, the phone trembling in her hand. She'd heard stories of Eleanor Grayson, the elusive woman who'd turned a shack into a local legend, but the call felt surreal. Yes, I can be there, she stammered, her heart racing as she grabbed her jacket and headed out, the thank you note still in her pocket. When Sarah walked into the cafe 20 minutes later, the room erupted in applause. Mr. Jenkins stood, his coffee cup raised like a toast. Lily rushed forward, her eyes brimming with tears, and even Mike gave a rare nod of respect. Sarah's cheeks flushed, her mind struggling to process the scene. Eleanor stepped forward, extending a hand. Sarah, I was Clara yesterday. That bowl of chowder you gave me, it reminded me why I built this place. You're not just rehired. I want you as assistant manager to help make this cafe what it's meant to be. Sarah's eyes widened, her throat tight with emotion. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Eleanor smiled, a rare warmth in her eyes. Say yes. Sarah nodded, tears spilling over as the cafe cheered again, the sound washing away the sting of yesterday's humiliation. The news of Sarah's reinstatement spread like wildfire through Port Haven. By evening, the cafe was packed, customers coming not just for chowder, but to see the waitress who'd stood up for kindness and won. Tom Harper was there, his quiet smile brighter than usual as he watched Sarah move through the room, now wearing a new name tag that read Assistant Manager. Lily, emboldened by Sarah's example, started a small pay-it-forward board near the counter, where customers could leave notes or small donations for those in need. Mrs. Thompson, her eyes bright with gratitude, slipped a handwritten card to Sarah, promising to bake her famous blueberry muffins as a thank you. Even the young family from yesterday returned to the toddler, waving her stuffed whale, as her parents thanked Sarah again, their faces less burdened now. That night, Sarah visited her mother Ellen at the hospital, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She told her everything, the firing, the despair, the unexpected call from Eleanor, the applause that had greeted her return. Ellen, weak but smiling, squeezed her hand. I told you, Sarah, kindness comes back. When Sarah got home, she found a note slipped under her door, written in Tom's careful handwriting. You're an inspiration, Sarah. The whole town's talking about you. If you ever need a friend, I'm here. She smiled, tucking the note next to Clara's, a small collection of proof that her faith hadn't been misplaced. In the weeks that followed, the Lighthouse Cafe became more than a place to eat. Inspired by Sarah's story, the community rallied to create a fund for locals in need, starting with a donation to help cover Ellen's medical bills. Sarah and Lily organized weekly kindness nights, where customers could share stories or donate meals, turning the cafe into a beacon of hope. Sarah, now assistant manager, led with the same quiet grace she'd always shown, but with a new confidence, knowing her actions had sparked something bigger. She still faced struggles, bills, her mother's health, the daily grind, but she carried a certainty that kindness had power not just to help others, but to transform lives. The lesson was clear, woven into every bowl of chowder, served, every smile exchanged kindness, even when it feels like a risk, can create ripples that reach far beyond the moment. It's a choice to see the humanity in others, to give without expecting return, to stand up for what's right, even when the world pushes back. Sarah's story taught Port Haven, and anyone who heard it, that small acts of compassion can mend broken hearts, rebuild communities, and remind us all that goodness matters even in the hardest times. As Sarah locked up the cafe one evening, the harbor glowing under a starry sky, she looked at the Pay It Forward board, now covered in notes of gratitude. She thought of her mother, of Clara, of the people she'd helped, and knew that every choice to be kind had been worth it. The world might not always see it, but kindness always finds its way back, lighting the darkest paths with hope.